Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I am joined by Dr. Christopher Flathmann from Clemson University to discuss enhancing human AI collaboration. Dr. Flathmann is a research assistant, professor, and associate director of Clemson's TRACE Research Group, as well as co-director of the Center of Human AI Interaction, Collaboration, and Teaming. His research focuses on the acceptance and influence on AI teammates within teams and society, aiming to advance the design of AI systems that act as effective teammates alongside humans. This work is essential in advancing AI applications in collaborative environments. Today, we are going to delve into one of Dr. Flathmann's recent projects, where he and his team utilized the Prolific platform to generate a novel dataset for studying human AI teaming. This project involved over 700 participants interacting with AI tools in real time. And we will explore the project's scope, methodology, and the significant value derived from this research. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to hear from you and take a look at this work in finer detail. Over to you.
Thanks. So, hey everyone. As the intro stated, I'm Dr. Chris Flathmann. I'm going to be presenting on a project today that we've shortly titled Exploring Trust, Acceptance, and Behavioral Differences with Human AI Collaboration. This is a project between myself and my close collaborator, Dr. Nathan McNeese, who's the normal director of TRACE Research Group. So we worked on this over the past couple months, and we're happy to present the results today. So with that being said, we can kind of just dive right in. I just want to give a quick overview of the things we're going to talk about today. As mentioned, just some details on who we are, what we do outside of this project, then talk about why we think this project's really important, how we end up doing this project, some early results we have for this project. We're not going to go too deep on those, but we'll do a nice 10,000-foot overview of them, talking about the impact we have on the actual domain through the project, as well as where this situates, amongst other things. And then lastly, hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about some future work and what happens next for this work, as well as other people who may want to do something similar. So just a quick overview of who we are. So that's me on the bottom. I'm a research assistant professor in human-centered computing at Clemson. I have a PhD in human-centered computing also from Clemson. I associate director research group known as the Team Research Analytics and Computational Environments, or TRACE, if you want to make it nice and short. And I'm also the co-director of our new center, which focuses on human AI, interaction, collaboration, and teaming. I'm accompanied, not virtually today, but spiritually, by Dr. Nathan McNeese, who is the McQueen-Quattlebaum Endowed Professor in Human-Centered Computing. He has a PhD in Information Science from Penn State University, and he is the director of TRACE Research Group and that aforementioned center that we just formed at Clemson University. We're both really excited by this project, as well as being invited out by Prolific to talk about this. So with that being said, we can kind of chat about what we actually do as researchers. So not just where we sit and who we talk to, but what we do on a daily basis. Essentially, we focus on human AI teamwork, which is simply the ability for humans and AI to work interdependently to complete shared goals. So rather than just looking at AI systems as simple tools that accomplish very simple tasks, or even super tools that accomplish complex tasks outside of humans, we view them as two entities who can somewhat need each other in an interaction. So where certain things are better for AI to do, maybe they're high data throughput applications, maybe they're more complex, maybe they might be more dynamic applications, compared to humans who are really good with things related to emotion, or more squishy, less defined or subjective topics. Or even sometimes we do some research with ethical concerns, where humans are really going to be that expert and a grounding force for some of those research topics. We look at how that symbiotic relationship can create a better outcome when humans and AI work together. So usually what that means is we look at, and if we sum up everything in the shortest way we can, it's just how to best design AI and train humans to work independently with each other. There's a lot more to that, and that definitely just scratches the surface. But if I had to put everything in a single question, that's a nice broad question for what we do. And through that question, we've been able to get a number of funded projects with the federal government that we're really interested in outside of just this one. We look at things related to the ethical creation of AI teammates. We look at how you can use AI to overcome extreme environments that humans are not comfortable in, whether it be underwater, high radiation, high altitude. We also look at how you can merge AI with extended reality technologies to improve aviation maintenance. So when you're talking about humans who have high cognitive workload working on planes every single day, we look at how AI can help reduce that cognitive workload while still increasing performance. And then lastly, we've even looked at how AI can work to increase the education quality in our local area here in South Carolina, which is based on how to do professional development plans for middle school teachers. So a wide range of projects, but all centered around this idea of humans and AI working together to create a better outcome at the end of the day.
Amazing. So, given kind of your background in this space, what would you say inspired this piece of work that we're going to dive in today?
Yeah, so the concept of human AI teaming is new-ish in the landscape of research. It's not, you know, a month old, but it's definitely something that's still iterating, still being defined, still being worked on. And recently, about a year ago, we ran a study, about 2 years ago now, we ran a study that explored just the simple wording. So, we have this concept of AI teammates. How do people react to that wording? And we found that there were hesitations around that wording. And so that's a concern, but it's a concern that we felt needed further exploration. So over the past year or two, we've really been diving into what it means to be a teammate, and especially from a person's perspective, whether that be a worker, whether it be a worker in an aviation context, whether it be a military officer who's using AI for something, or whether it be a teacher. What does it mean to be a teammate for an AI system? And so over the year, over the last couple of years, we've really been iterating what that means, what an AI needs to accomplish to be seen as a teammate, and then if it can accomplish that, can humans then see it as a teammate? Do they see it as something that they can work interdependently with, or is it always just going to be this nebulous tool that kind of sits over in the corner? So we've really tried to focus in on, instead of just trying to have a research domain say, oh, human AI teaming is the future, it's now trying to look back at the people who are going to be in those teams and ask them, what do you need? What do you want from this potential construct, essentially?
And just to tie up the final piece there, why would you say that this research is so important in the space currently?
Yeah, I think what's kind of propelled, and we'll dive into this in the methods a little bit. We specifically, AI is a bit of a broad term. We looked at large language models specifically. One of the challenges we've seen in the last few years is that AI just kind of magically showed up a lot faster than people expected. I think everyone was really behind AI, especially in our domain. But a lot of what we were doing, we were expecting was maybe a little bit further out, since when it would actually be seen by the public a little bit. But I think everyone can tell you that in the past year, the amount of public interaction with these systems has increased to a level that I don't think everyone fully realized, and even realized how much they were being interacting with those systems. So based on all of that, we've really looked at, like, okay, it's really time to start working with people, working with these systems to see where this is going, to see what they need, because people are really starting to form opinions about AI systems, and we need to capture those early. So we want to be there early, see what people are thinking, see what their reactions are, then from there ask, okay, so how do we design a better AI system based on those needs, based on those reactions?
Nice.
So with that, we can kind of talk about how this gets done, um, what we actually did to do that project. So just to talk about the overview motivations, just like I said, in terms of a few recent efforts and why we did this. In terms of what we actually focused on in the past, there's kind of just been a dynamic. It's been what's called tools or teammates. So a lot of the AI space, especially the human AI space, has looked at what's called AI tools, and that's where an AI system can just work separately from a human, or a human can use it similarly to how you would use a normal tool. But as AI has increased, what it can do is it can work without human supervision. It can work on its own. and it can work interdependently. AI are really showing the ability to do things humans can't do. And so that's where this terminology of teammate comes from. And so, like I said, a couple years ago, we ran a project and it found that that simple word of teammate does create some negative expectations. At the time, we saw acceptance actually lower as the AI was called a teammate. And we even saw some job security concerns, I should say, some job security concerns increase. So job security declines, but job security concerns increase essentially. Um, and because of that, we were like, okay, that's a challenge. We now see those expectations being problematic. How do we get in front of those expectations? How do we use those expectations to design better AI teammates and help people feel safe and secure with this new technology? So that was kind of our research motivation. And as I mentioned, as a practical motivation, large language models specifically have kind of hit the ground running. And from a teammate perspective, one of the greatest challenges our domain has had over the last few years is that AI just wasn't great at communicating with humans. And a lot of teamwork is communication. Even if it's not natural language, communication is still really important. And so LLMs have kind of opened the door to making a more practical application of our domain where communication is at the forefront. And so we can kind of see a path for that teammate. And so that leads to the specific project goals here outside of the domain and outside of everything like that. And it kind of gets boiled down to four specific things. It's understanding if and how perceptions of AI differ after interacting with LLM tools and teammates. So to dive into that first one a little bit more, in the past, we've looked at expectations, but now we want to bridge over an interaction. So now that people are actually working with these systems, seeing them on a daily basis, we don't think it's enough to just be like, if you were to work with this system, how would you perceive it? We want to actually have people work with it. And we'll dive into the methodology a little bit about how that's actually practically possible now. But it's been a great shift in moving away from expectations and moving towards real interaction. We also want to look at how participants trust and accept large language models as teammates. Once again, not that really focuses on that practical motivation. If we start using these large language models in our domain and even practically, are we able to position them as teammates? If we can, then that's great for our research domain, especially because now moving forward, our entire domain can start to use more novel, even off the shelf AI systems to really optimize some of their research and investigate research questions that are more pertinent to real world people. That third one is about looking at how we can determine if humans interact differently with LLMs, if we call them tools or teammates. Once again, from an expectation perspective, we know if we call an LLM a tool or an LLM a teammate or an AI tool or an AI teammate, we do see that difference. But once we were interacting with it, once they kind of form that working relationship with them, is that interaction, is that formation going to differ based on what we call it? And we know that with AI systems, what you do call it changes interactions. So with humans, if we change our titles, if we change who we are, if we change who we're labeled as, sometimes it can change that interaction. And so we look at that with an AI system to see, does that interaction change? And then we finish off at the end talking about whether or not all these questions we talked about vary from person to person. One of the challenges we have in our domain, is I think any tech domain, is that every person is different and every person needs something different. They want something different. And designing a single system to fit those differences is really hard. One of the more interesting aspects of AI is that it kind of promises a future where that individual difference, where that individuality can kind of be considered by singular systems. But the challenge of doing that is we have to be intentional about including that consideration. We also have to be intentional about identifying which potential parameters need to be considered, which differences need to be considered. Because if we just throw every single difference between individuals in there, it very well could produce some false noise. It could produce something that isn't impactful. Identifying which ones matter, which ones need to be considered is a strong aspect of this project. It's not, I will also say though, it's not the end all, this is not the end all be all for that project. There's a lot of research that does a lot of interesting stuff with gender, with race, with age demographics, or even with technological literacy demographics. So looking at the differences between individuals is something that this project can't even finish, but we'd like to just at least throw that in the conversation as we move forward.
Amazing. So with that, I think we would love to hear more about the actual research. So can you walk us through the methodology you took to get to these results?
Yeah, just to kind of give us a grounding point. On the side, we have a couple high level details, but eventually a paper will hopefully come out on this that kind of explains everything in a much stronger level of detail. But to give that high flyover overview, essentially we ran an online experiment in the Qualtrics platform, which got distributed by Prolific, which is why I'm here. That essentially Qualtrics is just a survey platform. For anyone who's never used it, it lets you make surveys, lets you collect data via survey. It's fantastic for that. One of the things that is actually really nice about it is that it has native JavaScript integration, which means if you can have a web API or an API endpoint, so any web interface to get any online interface to get data, you can actually go get it through Qualtrics. So because of that, we've been able to actually take off-the-shelf LLM products like OpenAI's GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is what we used at the time, and we can actually integrate it live into a Qualtrics survey. And so that was kind of what we ended up running with here. So we ran basically a server where people interacted with an actual AI, specifically GPT 3.5 Turbo, and they completed a travel planning task. But when we presented that AI to humans, to the participants, we either told everyone that that was a tool or a teammate. So the functional design of the system doesn't change, but we wanted to present it as something different. And we chose this task because it can kind of be completed as a tool or a teammate. In the domain, there are functional differences between the two. So we kind of picked a task that's in that little bit of a gray area where it could be either. But there are definitely tasks out there where this difference between the two systems becomes much more stark and different. But that becomes a little apples and oranges for comparing some of this research. So we found a task that kind of had that gray area. We positioned AI inside that gray area. Functionally, it acts the same, but we call it a tool or a teammate, and then we give humans just a blank slate to interact with it to complete that task. And in total, we were able to recruit 778 participants for that. In terms of an AI data set or an AI machine learning set, that might be a little bit small, but I will say in terms of a human subjects experiment for human AI teaming, that's very large. Trying to hit 100 participants for our research can sometimes be hard. So online experiments where humans actually interacted with a real AI system and getting 800 of them, very nice, and very grateful that Prolific was able to help with that. And the fact that we also, fun fact, able to do that in under 14 hours, which is really nice. I started up, went to bed, came back, and it was done. So that was great. It was the most efficient data collection I've definitely ever done. But beyond just being an efficient data collection, we had something very important come out of that, which is that, as many people may or may not know, Prolific allows for the collection of representative data samples for your area. So for us, we were able to get a representative sample of the actual United States for our data collection, which is really important if you remember that fourth goal about individual differences. But just as a metric for the domain, it's really important. Our domain is often plagued by individual research studies that have limitations on their demographics, whether it be using all college kids, whether it be using a specific cultural region of the US. It often creates somewhat of a limitation of the diverse perspectives you're getting in the room. So we were able to get fantastic, I don't have it up there, but I think we had about an average age of 40, which is something that's not often common in our domain. Normally it's used a lot younger. We had a fantastic distribution of different races come in. So we had that cultural perspective. And then even from a gender perspective, we have a great balance. And we aren't just looking at a bunch of white males who are giving their opinions about AI. We're looking at those differences and how they might differ from person to person. So we're really excited about that. And we're most excited that it didn't take months. So that's the best part about it. To kind of touch on that just a little bit, though, I'd like to give a quick plunge into what it actually looks like, what actually happened. So don't worry about trying to read that image on the right, but that's just a screenshot of our survey. It explains the actual task they're doing. And then at the bottom where that gray box is, we actually gave participants a straight chat line into OpenAI GPT 3.5. So they could type messages in that box and send it, and it would build a conversation log live in Qualtrics. So once again, just a fantastic integration. Thankful that Qualtrics allows JavaScript, but it has been a fantastic way for us to do real AI systems and log them and have people interact with them in a way that data is automatically collected. So the data gets sent back into the Qualtrics backend, and we can save it and analyze it later. And so what that and then as mentioned, the labels is just tool or teammate. So if you squint a little bit, you can see there right above the gray box says AI teammate colon, and then the text from the AI teammate. So every time you send a message, the response would say teammate or tool and say the message. Once again, functionally the same, presentation wise a little bit different. And so that leads to our data collection, which obviously we got demographic and personality differences. We got experiences with AI. We got their attitudes towards AI in general. So we looked at those individual differences. Then we were to get full conversation logs, which was great. Having that in a way that's being able to be analyzed. We'll talk about results in a little bit, but we got full digital conversation logs. So super easy to analyze, super easy to work with. And then we also looked at those perceptions. So we looked at trust, the perceived performance of the AI, the usefulness of the AI, the satisfaction with AI, and even the workload. So wondering when people interacting with these systems, is this workload changing? And then to highlight kind of what we would expect based on our expectations research, we would expect a slight dip in that teammate condition. We'd expect maybe potentially humans to trust a teammate slightly less because teammates are a stronger a word essentially than a tool. There's more weight to calling something a teammate. And so the bar for trusting a teammate might be higher. So relatively, we'd expect do that bar being higher, trust might be perceived as a little bit lower for a lot of these humans. Same thing with performance. If the AI is performing at the level of a teammate, in the past, we've known that AI systems don't perform well to be called teammates, but we've never looked at with an LLM. So based on the past research, we'd expect that might be a little bit lower, but we're open to that kind of being wrong because with this new disruptive version of AI coming out and hitting the ground, that may not hold essentially. So that was, we had kind of a cautious expectation of what our data was going to look like, but we were very open to being wrong because I said this is the first time we had this, we actually explored the actual interaction here. And it was the first time we actually worked with these LLMs to do this kind of work. So. Alrighty. And with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and talk about what happened. So based on everything that happened there, based on all those methodologies, we're just going to do a brief overview of what results came back. First, we found that for trust, we actually had greater trust when AI were actually was teammates as opposed to tools. For us, this was a kind of a landmark finding for our group, which was this was the first time we've actually seen referring to an AI as a teammate or seeing an AI as a teammate increased a perception. So this is the first time, especially when working with now that we're working with LLMs, it's the first time we've seen human AI teaming benefit that perception humans form. So we were really, really excited by that. It's a small increase, but when you're talking about a short 5-minute conversation, even small increases could compound over time. So we were really excited to see that. And then the other thing we found was that for workload, there was statistical equivalence between tool and teammate conditions. So what that would tell us is that if, for instance, there are interaction differences between the two conditions, whatever interaction differences exist, don't increase workload in a small way between participants. So all that would simply mean is that if I'm doing something differently, even though I'm doing it differently, it's not making the task harder. It's not making me work harder to complete this task. It just means we're interacting with it a little bit differently. So it's a good thing to note because in a second, we're going to talk about that actual difference between interaction. But just to note that no matter what happens with that difference, we still aren't seeing that cascade into people working harder with that actual system. So this was a great finding for us. We saw that no matter if now that we're referring to tools and teammates, we're not going to get a significant increase in the actual workload people have interacting, but we're still going to get that increase in trust. So humans actually see that teammate word as a bonus. And now in the future, we obviously need to make sure AI teammates earn that trust and can actually meet what is being expected and trusted of them. But we're really excited to see that higher level of trust right there. And so with that being said, we can talk about this interaction piece. What actually happened to that interaction? And so to do that, we actually ran a sentiment analysis on the actual chat logs themselves. So we looked at the human messages being sent. Obviously, we could look at the AI messages, but We're really focused here on the human side of that equation. So you could reanalyze this to look at both and look at that content. But what we ended up doing is just focusing on that human side of the data and looking at how human interactions change. And what we found, obviously, generally speaking, these humans and these participants were completing a travel planning task. So a lot of their language was fairly neutral about travel planning, which is neither positive, negative, or exciting. But when working with AI teammates, when talking with these teammates, we actually found that there was different sentiment between the two conditions, between the two participant groups. And most notably, when working with teammates, conversations actually skewed more positive. So human teammates were using more positive language. They were talking more positively to this AI system. And we found that significant difference between the two. And so that's an exciting finding for us as well, because it shows, in a team paradigm, there's a potential that there's a stronger connection getting formed between the human and the AI from a conversational perspective. They're not viewing it as some mindless tool that has nothing associated with it. It is a system that they need to positively interact with, positively work with. And that's a great finding for us. And it's a great finding, especially if this type of work ever gets expanded. We're looking at multi-human teams, teams with multiple humans and multiple AI systems. Having a positive mental attitude, having positive communication really goes a long way in team health, keeping teams healthy, keeping teams going. And so seeing that humans can actually have that positive relationship with an AI teammate, seeing that they can actually have positive conversation with them is just something that's really, really hopeful for us, because we can see that positive trend, especially when you look at trust as well. We see that more positive trend compounding in these human AI teams, and would hope to have a longevity kind of spurred out of these teams based on that positive interaction. So we're really, really excited by that. We're really happy about that. And then kind of dip into the individual differences side. I won't go too deep on this, but this is kind of a complicated web of stuff that happens. Essentially, on the right there is a quick figure of some data that's just for the trust metric. But we basically ran support vector machines to do feature identification. So we had a bunch of individual differences, and then we basically ran them into a machine learning algorithm to identify which ones might actually be important and be good predictors. And then based on that, we threw the most important ones into linear models to test them for significance. The overwhelming trend we find out here is that for this type of task, when working with an LLM to do a very basic task, cynical attitudes and prior experience with AI are coming in strong. So essentially, the more humans like or dislike AI as a general technology, the more likely they were to have positive or negative perceptions of the specific technology they work with. Makes sense, but it's a challenge that we as researchers have to kind of tackle more prevalently. A lot of times we'll measure this cynical attitude, we'll measure this characteristic, but we won't do anything about it. And so it shows that if we're really going to take human AI teaming seriously, if we're really going to work with AI systems, we have to somewhat change public perception. We have to talk to people about AI systems. Maybe we even have to train humans to see them more positively before that interaction happens. And maybe doing so, we get that more positive interaction, that positive perception on the back end as well. So trying to reduce those cynical attitudes, try to see AI as a positive is going to be some legwork, but it's gonna require everyone to also act in good faith, make sure everyone's working with AI systems in a positive way, we're implementing them in a positive way, and then talking to humans, talking to people about how, hey, you don't need to be cynical about the technology, be skeptical, approach it with caution, but let's see it maybe even in a neutral light and move from there. So very important aspect there. And then obviously prior experience. So the more people were experienced in working with AI systems, the better their perceptions of that system, specifically with trust, satisfaction, usefulness. This is an interesting one because, like I said, we're using an off-the-shelf system. This is a straight, we didn't build any actual system for this. They're talking with a normal LLM. But what we see is that training humans to work with these systems is still going to go a long way, not just with interaction, but with perception. As humans work with these systems, as they interact with them, they're going to get better at trusting them. They're going to get better at being satisfied with them. And so it's an aspect you have to consider, is that just because we looked at one human AI interaction doesn't mean that the 10 others that preceded that are going to not impact it. So we have to be aware of humans not as a monolith, but as individuals with these different experiences with AI systems that have ultimately led them to a human AI team. And the challenge, the fun challenge is that research now has to consider all those experiences and consider that entire background for each individual, because it's apparently going to change some things. So that's our basic finding there. Obviously, this isn't conclusive for individual differences. So there are things over on the right related to age, related to personality differences. Those can definitely come into play. They most likely will when we're talking about such a basic task of making a travel plan. We don't see that strong difference. But I could say from other research we've had, especially when it comes to gender or age, we see strong differences in how people interact with these systems. So it's an important thing to keep in mind. This isn't the end all be all, but in terms of this kind of one shot experiment, there is a strong implication of the cynical attitudes towards the technology in general, as well as the experience humans have with other AI systems really playing a role in these perceptions.
Were there any results in this process that surprised you?
Yeah, so I think for us, for me, it goes back to those two perceptions. Obviously, trust being higher is great. I think our when we walked into this, our best case scenario was that we get equal. We were like, all right, which for science is kind of a challenge. Getting similar results that are not significantly different can sometimes be a challenge. But in terms of writing and communicating those results, but in our head, we were like, a great outcome of this would be it just comes out equal. There's no difference. We see that, okay, it's on par. We're good to go. And that would kind of give us our signal of like, all right, we're on the right track. And then so seeing that aspect come back, seeing trust come back positive. I remember I went to Nathan the next day. I was like, we got a really cool result that we've never seen before. Um, and we were just really excited. We're like, this shows that, especially with the new AI systems hitting the market, the tide might be changing on that perception. 5 years ago, calling an AI teammate was, that's like a weird foreign thing, foreign concept. Now it's like, okay, humans can see that. Humans can see that interaction. They can see what AI can do really well. And that conversation hits the real world. I see all the time people talking about like, where should we put AI? What should we have AI do? It's one of the big things we do as researchers. It's one of the big things we do with our funding partners, with our clients. It's about talking about what can an AI do for you that you might not be able to do. And then the other half of that equation is, okay, based on that though, what can you do better? How can we empower those individuals? So seeing trust go up, even a small amount, but at least a significant amount, was really exciting, because it shows that I think a lot of people see that potential path for AI to provide them and to empower them with that information. And then the second one, obviously, with workload, when you couple that workload with the sentiment, we were kind of expecting people to kind of change their conversation with the teammate, but overcomplicate their conversation, make it more complex, make it more dialogic, as opposed to with tools saying the basic things. That I don't have any data for this one, but just cursory looks at the data itself. People was asking the AI teams to do more work, but they were still more positive about that. So it was very interesting to see that positivity come back while not having workload. It's just like, okay, there's definitely something interacting. The interaction there is definitely changing, but humans don't see that as more work. And when the interaction itself is being more positive, it's great to see in teams that like being positive doesn't hurt. It's not harder to have a good mental attitude. So I think that was great for us. I think those are our two favorites. I think in terms of individual differences, it's always great to see this, but there's going to be a trend we continue to see. Those two findings are really like, that's a shift in the paradigm from the stuff we've been working on in the past. So really excited about that. And yeah, just great.
And I guess like you guys used GPT 3.5 Turbo, right? I guess
Yep.
now we're sitting in another present where there are more developments in the space and the tools and teammates that exist. How do you think the new advancements would affect this type of work if you got to do it again? Like, would you approach it
Yeah.
new? And how do you think the results would potentially differ?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I do kind of in my day to day, as our side company that we work on, is we kind of audit and we explore how AI can optimize processes, how existing teams can integrate AI as a teammate. And one of the challenges we see there is that teams have, a list. Let's say that there's a spectrum of tasks teams accomplish. One of the biggest challenges that those teams have is they don't understand where AI could fit in there. They see AI as kind of like it's all or nothing. It's either AI is good enough for our processes or it's not. And we tried to shift that narrative. I was having a conversation this week with someone about that, where I was like, okay, here's all the tasks you do. Right now, AI is good enough for the first three. So let's talk about the first three, but let's keep the next seven in mind. And as AI progresses, you can see how it interacts with those other seven. So now, no longer is it the case where you have to wait for that golden bullet technology to show up. You can outline your existing workload and see where AI can go in. And as the technology develops, it's just a matter of doing a tech assessment. Is it good enough to fit in this piece of the puzzle for what we're doing? And so, based on what we've worked on now, I think for this task, it's not going to be any better. If I threw in GPT 4.4, I think we're on 4.0 turbo now or whatever it is, which in a month, this presentation will now be dated because now we're on 4.5 turbo or whatever it's going to be. But whichever one we use, I didn't think they would change this because we picked a task that was simple enough. It's actually the task we chose was doing a travel planning task for Washington, D.C. That is information that's fairly static. It's not going to change very much. And that's why we chose it, picking something that was consistent with information that had a level of consistency. Where I think these results change is now with these greater models, we can go elsewhere. We don't have to do a static task. And so when I talked earlier about that tool teammate functional divide splitting, I think as these models continue to increase, you'll see that functional split there. And so I know some future studies, people are talking about like, let's explore the difference functionally, not just presentation wise. So I think really that's where we're getting it. And for me, I don't see these results getting weaker as the functional differences between those two camps lie. So that's one of the things that really excites me there. And that kind of leads into our impact on the domain and what it means for everyone, which is that as we present AI as teammates, we know it can positively benefit perception. And so if we did this again, we'd kind of go into it knowing, oh, we can get that positive perception. Maybe for a future study, maybe even for a redo of this study one day, we look at how we can maximize that positive perception. Can we widen that gap? Is there a way we can present the AI teammate to widen that gap even further? Highlight some characteristics of it, highlights capabilities. And we told people they were working with GPT 3.5. They knew they were working with a highly capable model. Is there a way that you can increase that perception, increase that positive perception? But that's a great takeaway for us. And then the next one is obviously the conversational dynamics between humans and AI. They can change based on that perception. We saw that based on that presentation, we saw that as humans were working with these AI systems, just because we call it something different, humans were willing to work with it differently. And that's great for us because it shows that humans who, I think get a bad rap for being bad at change, even though that's kind of like the best thing the thing we're actually best at is change. But we get a bad rap for being bad at change sometimes. I think it shows that there's a way, just by simply presenting this thing differently, we were able to get people to interact with it more positively. I think that's a great finding for us and a great takeaway, which is that, and it's not just for teammate, the way you present these systems, if someone else was doing research like this, be mindful about how you're presenting that, because you can really change that interaction. For us, we able to get more positive interaction. So it's great for us, but keep that in mind. Keep in mind how you're presenting these things. It's really going to change that interaction. And so I think if we did this again, there's a way that we present it differently. There's other presentation characteristics we look at, and we see how that even changes that interaction. So that would be even more exciting. That third one, obviously, individual differences, they're important, and they're not, sorry, research is not done with them. I think we're not the only ones who are going to say this, but controversial opinion, which is that people are different, and you kind of need to consider those differences. Unfortunately, there's not enough of doing that in research. A lot of research is us measuring those differences and then controlling for them in a stat test. But there's really not a conclusion made from those differences all the time. And I think that's an aspect that we can really work on and really start to get more intentional about, is how we design systems for individuals and not how we design systems for humans in general. And then that last one, obviously, when we're talking about large language models, this goes back to what you were just asking. They're a fantastic tool for our research moving forward. And the reason I say moving forward specifically is because they're not done being developed. And I could even back that statement up. I'll even say like generative AI in general is going to be great for human AI teaming, not just large language models. Seeing where generative AI goes, and AI in general, I mean, it's all going to develop, new applications going to be built. But for us, large language models are great because they're off the shelf components oftentimes. This isn't just talking about like, we don't build our own AI models for this stuff. We found one that worked and we were going to repurpose it. And that was great. The amount of effort that went into getting a full AI system spun up and working, it was fantastic.
Amazing. I mean, even my mind is racing because I feel like at this time, a lot of governments are, building legislation around the use of these types of agents, tools, AI, however you want to call them. And I think a big issue is like, how do we build trust with the public around the usage of these general purpose tools? And that is a big challenge for, most governments across the world. So it feels like this is a really great insight in terms of how you speak to the general public around something that maybe isn't fully understood, but is very valuable if used in the right way, right? So I guess a question I have is for people who are listening and engaging with this, either the data set or the findings here, what could they take out of it today, tomorrow in their own research? And do you have any indicators of that in your own work, like how you've been able to utilize these findings in actionable tasks?
Yeah, I think getting out of just our lab, talking about everyone who could use this, I think there's something that everyone could take something small from this, whether they're doing human AI teaming research exactly like we are, or if they're doing something related. If you're talking about our methodology, we're looking now, we moved away from expectations. And I think we have to do that as a domain. We're now looking at real interactions. We're looking at the actual interactions people have. And I hope that we've provided a methodology that's reproducible. Obviously, once the paper comes out, it makes it easier to kind of follow that guideline. But I mean, I'm open to, if someone even contacts me, I'll explain to them how we did it. I'll work with them on how we do it. I've shared this survey multiple times to be like, there's a cool way to do this. And as a methodology is great. If you're building an AI system, I think it's important to remember that like building an accurate system is the first half. The second half is getting humans to accept it, getting humans to use it, positively perceive it. This, for the most hardcore AI developers, this methodology is still useful because it gives you a methodology to actually validate that system in the hands of users. And we did it in under 14 hours with a lot of data coming out of that. So, and you could even an aspect you could even do is expand this, get interviews from people based on their interactions, talk to them. So there's a way to even expand our own methodology to get more feedback, but really getting that human validation of a system is really, really important. So I think this methodology speaks a lot to that. In terms of these results themselves, I think for human AI teaming research, as well as human AI interaction research, this shows the importance of that label. It shows the importance of that divide. But in general, it also shows the importance of just presenting your system accurately to people, presenting your system as it needs to be presented. If you're designing, like I said, we didn't get into the functional aspects, but if you're designing an AI to be a teammate, present it as a teammate. But if you're designing it to be a tool, don't present it as a teammate. That's a finding we've kind of found with this, but we've repeatedly shown. And the same goes for any other thing. If you're presenting an AI as a large language model, but it doesn't have those capabilities, that might inadvertently negatively impact the perception people have. Because the second you present it as something, people can form that expectation of what it is. And if it doesn't meet that expectation, that's when you get drops in that perception. For us, I like to say that large language models met those expectations because we saw perceptions increase. But if it doesn't meet that expectation, you're going to get that drop. So I think it's really important for that. And then to kind of hit like our space. So what we do, how it impacts our future work. Number one is next steps is we now know that AI teammates can be trusted. We now know they can be at least trusted as much as tools, but we especially know that in this instance, we actually found great levels of trust. Acceptance was high for the LLMs as AI teammates, but it was still relatively similar. Not saying a statistical conclusions there, but relatively similar to the tool condition. The next step is how do we get that higher? How do we get acceptance even higher? So now we know that talking to an AI, talking to an AI we call a teammate isn't going to drastically drop that perception or that acceptance. So what's the next step? How do we get it higher? How do we get these systems accepted? But how do we do that while keeping humans feeling safe? How do we do that while making them feel in control? How do we interact with all that? That's where a lot of my work specifically is coming in, is balancing that acceptance with that control, with that perception, and even with skepticism. Humans need to be skeptical of AI systems as well. So how do we balance all that? Additionally, it's all about developing AI models that can complete teammate functions. For us, we looked at communication, but teams do more than just communication. Just to like get technical for a second, teams have transactive memory, shared understanding, which is another word for something called team cognition. They have spatial awareness. They have, situational awareness. Like the amount of information that teams actually process on a daily basis, pass around. Backup behaviors is another one. If you fail, the reason we work at teams is because if you fail, that other teammate can pick it up and they can help. Yeah. AI systems need to start doing that if we're going to call them teammates. And this is something that, as researchers, we've stated, it's not just enough to call it a teammate. We have to start getting it to the capabilities it needs. For this task, a teammate only needed conversational capabilities. So we were able to explore that. But there are so many other tasks where teammates need so much more than just conversation. And there are even some tasks where conversation isn't needed. There are so many teams out there. If you look at human animal teams, like they operate at high levels and do some amazing things. They don't talk to each other. At least I don't think they do. Like, no talking. So like that's an amazing thing. But like they do other stuff. If you look at human dog teams, dogs can do some amazing things humans can't. AI systems need to be designed to do those things and positioned to do that. But those dogs are trained to interact with humans as teammates. And the same has to go for AI systems. And even from a human perspective, humans might have to learn how to reshape a little bit of their interaction. And we need to do that in a way that is healthy and is helpful. So that's another aspect, is developing those AI systems, things like that. Then we also have exploring how interactions change and working with AI teammates. I think for us, that has more of a meta outcome, which is measurement. Like this one, we saw a positive conversation come out of here. I can see us in future studies using that as a metric we use to determine the actual interaction people have, and are we seeing them view it as a teammate is based on their conversation. A lot of research for our domain has been perceptual. As these teammates become real and start interacting with people, interaction data is going to be much more important. So trying to extract measurements from the interaction to determine not just is the human seeing this interaction as positive, but is the interaction itself actually positive. So I think that's another big future work for us. And then finishing off, just talking about how we can create AI tools and AI teammates, both, not just one or the other, but how can we make both really work with the individual? And I think if you want to make an entire research career, this last one could be like what you could probably pick one individual difference and make it your entire career for this one. Like, people are different, and really diving in on that, it's hard research, but it's research that we have to get done, which is that everyone's going to be different. Everyone's going to see these things differently. They're going to interact differently. Not only how do we consider that, but how do we help the AI consider that? How do we help the AI personalize this in a way that's unobtrusive to the human, in a way that doesn't feel stereotypical, in a way that is intentional? So I think that's kind of our last piece, is tying this all together. Is like, you can do all these things. You can make the AI a teammate. You can kind of measure positive interaction, but like it kind of needs to work for each individual as well. So that's kind of where I think where future work finishes, and the eternal quest of this future work is making it work at the individual level.
Yeah, this has been so interesting. I think like understanding how this research is valuable in so many domains. I feel like if you are someone who is designing these systems and working in AI companies, it's so important to know who you're designing them for and how they're going to interact with them, as well as how the technology is built. But likewise, for people who are then proliferating the technology to other people, the language used is so critical to the building of trust. And right now, we know the public sentiment is not that big, like the trust level is quite low. So I feel like there's so many insights people can pull from this type of research that you've done here. And this is just the beginning, right? And it's interesting to hear how actually the terminology of AI is being kind of changed and evolving over time, because we hear agents a lot, we hear bots a lot, but actually that's having quite a big impact on the outcome on the user. And as we know, a lot of these big LLM and general purpose models, they are wanting to benefit humanity. A lot of their vision is that, and that means that interaction has to be at the forefront, right? And what that actually looks like, and what we're actually presenting to everyday folks who want to be using these tools. Right. I think I can go on and ask you loads of questions, but we've kind of run out of time. So before we leave, if anyone wants to reach you or find out more about the work or dive into new projects alongside of you and the Trace Lab, where can they get in touch?
Yeah, so if you're interested in this specific piece of work, we're trying to publish it. It is, the publication process is lengthy and sometimes obscure.
Yeah.
So it is under review, hopefully moving through that train as fast as it can. But if you're interested in our work in general, feel free to obviously reach out to either of us. But if you just search our names, you can find our websites, or I think they're going to be linked on this actual webpage. So we'll have all that for the webpage for this data set. So we'll have all that linked up. But we run a research group. We run a separate company where we do this more of an industry perspective. So our research group is more of the federal grant side. And then we have a separate group that does this at the industry level. So if you're interested in either perspective, we'd love to talk to you. Feel free to reach out to probably me is the easiest one. My inbox is a little less full, so I'd recommend that one, and I can make sure it gets to where it needs to go. But if you're just interested in reading more about it, just search us up and you'll be able to find our Google Scholar pages or our website, and you can find all of our papers there. And we'll have those links on the website. But thanks for having me out. It's been great to chat. This has been a fun time, and I've been excited for this research, and I'm excited to see where this goes next. So thanks.
So are we. Thank you so much.